Jake here for AmericanTrucks.com, and today I'm taking a look at the Mammoth Off-Road 2-inch front leveling kit for 2006 and newer Ram 1500 4x4s without air ride. Now, if you're planning on adding some larger wheels and tires, or even if you just want to level out the stance of your Ram 1500, a kit like this one from Mammoth Off-Road is going to be just the ticket for you. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I would like to reiterate that this kit is not compatible with any trucks that have air ride or the Rebel or TRX models. Now, these spacers are going to measure 1 1/4 inches, but they are still going to give you 2 inches in lift in the front end, just due to the way the suspension geometry is set up. As far as wheels and tires go, 33-inch tires are going to fit on here without an issue. However, if you're trying to fit 35s, you're going to run into some clearance issues. So for that reason, I would really recommend sticking with 33s. If you really want to fit those 35s, you're going to have to look at a larger size lift. Rams come from the factory with a little bit of rake to them. And if you're not familiar with the term, rake refers to the angle at which a vehicle sits, meaning that it's not sitting completely level, and that is by design. So if you're looking at it from the side, you'll notice on Rams and a lot of other pickup trucks that the front end tends to sit a little bit lower than the rear. That is done on purpose. So if you're hauling loads or you're towing something behind you, it will even out naturally when the suspension is loaded up. That kind of raked look is pretty cool if you like that old school muscle car look. But if you're looking to do any off-roading, or if you're looking to add some clearance for larger wheels and tires without going the whole hog on a lift kit, something like this is going to be the right kind of option for you. So what we're looking at here are essentially a pair of spacers. You will insert at the top of your front struts, and they're going to add about 2 inches of lift to your front suspension that'll end up leveling out the stance of the truck. It's a pretty simple thing, and it's not a huge piece, but it's super important that these are done right. Now, these ones in particular are made of CNC machined aircraft grade billet aluminum, and they've been anodized this nice black to keep everything protected from rust and corrosion. And unlike polyurethane spacers, metal ones like this are less likely to wear out, and they're going to stand up better to abuse. That's also good news if you plan to take your truck off-road. Now, raising the front end will result in a better approach angle and better overall ground clearance. It may not be a whole lot, but overall it's going to make a big difference functionally and visually. And if you're looking to fit a larger wheel and tire setup, a leveling kit like this will also help you with clearance. Raising up the front end of the truck just a little bit can help avoid rubbing and clearance issues with larger diameter wheels and tires. So if you're not looking to raise your truck way up to the sky, but you still want that beefy wheel and tire setup, this is definitely something you'll be interested in. Now, as far as pricing is concerned, these come in around $75, which I think is a pretty good value. Anything that adds a functional element to your vehicle for under $100 is well worth it in my opinion. And these are going to make an improvement in not just the look, but also the capabilities of your truck without much sacrifice. You're also getting a nice piece of kit here. And about the only thing you're going to sacrifice, in fact, is some time. At a soft 2 out of 3 on a difficulty meter, this is a job that you can accomplish in home in around 2 hours. It will require moving some bits of the wheel well out to gain access to the front struts, but overall, it's not a hard process. If you've ever replaced suspension components before, you'll be all right doing this. Just remember that once you've got everything bolted back together, you should plan on getting an alignment done since you are going to be changing around the suspension geometry. Now, for illustrative purposes, I have put in 3 of the bolts that come with it. You get 2 packages of bolts and locking nuts with these as well. So this is essentially what it's going to look like before you sit it on top of your front strut. But to show you more of what that looks like, let's head over to the install bay and we'll show you exactly how to get these installed on your Ram.
Tools required for this install include an impact gun, a ratchet, a hammer, a 21mm wrench, a 17mm ratcheting wrench, a 15/16 wrench, a pry bar, an 8mm Allen, a 10, 16, 17, 18, 21, and 22mm sockets, a couple bungee cords, as well as a jack and a couple jack stands. What's up, guys? Today we're going to be installing a leveling kit on our Ram 1500, so let's get right to it. So first things first, guys, after we get the truck up in the air, we have to remove our front wheels. So we'll take a 22mm socket and our locking lug nut key and take our wheels off. And now we can do that same thing on the other side. So now once we have our wheel removed and access to our fender well, we're gonna go ahead and disconnect this ABS line there's a clip that holds it into our brake line. So you can pull on that, open that clip and pop right out. And then we can follow our line up, and there's another connection here on the upper control arm that we can wiggle free. So now that we have our first two clips disconnected, we can follow our ABS line down, and it's clipped into the spindle as well. So we can just pull this one right out. So our next step is going to be to remove our tie rod end. So it's going to be a 21mm nut here. We can get a 21mm socket for, and then we can take a hammer right here to this piece to free up our ball joint. Leave that nut threaded on just a couple threads until we hit it out. And then we can fully remove our nut and disconnect our tie rod. So now we can come to our lower strut bolt. This is going to be a 21mm, and there's also a 15/16 nut on the back. So we'll get a 15/16 wrench on the back side. And then we can get our 21mm socket and get this bolt out. So then we can run out this bolt with our 21mm gun. If that doesn't work, we can jack up on the bottom of the spindle, and it'll give us that clearance to get it out. So now with our hub jacked up, we can go ahead and wiggle out our bolt. And this one's still a little stuck, so I'm gonna give it one more tap with the gun. So our next step is gonna be to disconnect our sway bar end link from our lower control arm. So it's gonna be right at the bottom here. It's an 18mm nut. So we can get an 18mm socket on that and remove it. So once we have our sway bar end link disconnected, our next step is going to be to disconnect our upper control arm from our spindle. So it's held on by a 21mm nut. But as soon as we disconnect that nut, our whole spindle is going to be able to fall down. So we want to support that weight with the jack stand. And then our whole hub is able to slide side to side right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take our tie rod, slide it back into place, and just put our nut on a couple threads. Now with everything held into position, we can go ahead and disconnect our nut. So now we can get in there with a 21mm ratcheting wrench. And we're gonna leave our nut threaded on a couple threads so that we can get in there with a hammer. We're gonna hit the side of the spindle so that our ball joint releases. So now we can take our hammer and give the top of our spindle a couple taps. Now we can take out our tie rod end again. So now we can go ahead and fully remove the nut that's holding our upper control arm to our spindle. Now a very common thing with ball joints is the whole stud likes to spin when you go to remove the nut. So we can get our 21mm ratcheting wrench on top and a 10mm socket on the bottom, and that will make sure our stud doesn't spin. So we've gone ahead and put a bungee cord onto our spindle just to better hold it into place while we remove our strut. So then we can come up to the top and we have 3 16mm nuts that we can get a 16mm ratcheting wrench on and remove those. So now with our top nuts removed, we can go ahead and get a pry bar on our lower control arm. So now we're ready to assemble our spacer. So we have these Allen bolts that are going to thread through our big holes in the backside. And then we can tighten those down using an 8mm Allen. Now you want to make sure you get these studs extra tight in there, because if not, when you go to put your nut on, it's just going to thread itself out the other way. So now we can get this onto our strut. So these holes are offset, so they're only going to line up one way, so that you can't put this on sideways, backwards. Okay. And then once we get that on, we'll take our factory 16mm nuts. We'll thread those on to our strut studs. And now we can get our 16mm socket, snug these down. So now we can reinstall our strut into our truck. So we're going to slide it up top. We'll put 1 or 2 nuts on just to hold it into place while we get it in place on our lower control arm. And then we can slide our bolt through, tighten down all of our nuts up top, and move on to our next step. So I have a couple bungee cords here holding the spindle up so it doesn't fall forward, as well as holding the tie rod out of our way so we can slide our strut in. Now we can go ahead and use a pry bar to slide our strut into place. So now once again, we're going to take a pry bar through our lower control arm and pry down so that we can line up the bottom of our strut. And we'll slide our bolt through. If it's hard to get the bolt through the stud, you could either jack up on the bottom of the hub or lower control arm. Or you can get a pry bar in there and give it a tap with a hammer. So now we can reinstall our 15/16 nut on the other side of our lower strut bolt. And then we can grab a 15/16 wrench for the nut side and a 21mm socket on the bolt head side. So now we can go ahead and install the rest of our nuts at the top of our strut. And then we can go ahead and tighten those down using a 17mm ratcheting wrench. So that'll wrap up this review and install of the Mammoth 2-inch front leveling kit for your 06 to current Ram 1500, 4-wheel drive, non-air ride, and excluding the Rebel and TRX. Thank you for watching, and remember, for all things Ram, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.